So let's dive into the Virginia defense, Trevor, because in a lot of ways, their defense mirrors their offense. In a lot of ways, the difference is there is, at least on that side of the ball, there is at least one stud on that side of the ball, which we'll get into. But the defensive story, as I said, very similar to the offense. You look at the rankings: 82nd nationally in scoring defense, 98th in total defense, 49th in rushing yards, 87th in yards per play, 46th in yards per rush. So decent run defense, which fits really well with what we're going to talk about. 118th in pass defense, 98th in yards allowed per attempt, 112th in yards allowed per completion, 76th in passer rating, 127th in sacks. They have allowed on the season this year, they've allowed 15. They have only registered 15 sacks on the season, which is not a good number. So they just don't get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. When you look at them too, Trev, 65th in third down offense, and they are 114th in red zone offense. Now, if you're looking at it for Virginia on the season, they've turned the ball over 12 times in 9 games, which is not good, but they've only forced 11 turnovers on the season. So they're not a team that so far this season has been overly effective at forcing turnovers. But what was one of the things that helped them beat Pitt? It was the first time since the Boston College game that they forced more than one turnover. All right, so 2 turnovers, win over Coastal Carolina. 3 forced turnovers, win over BC. 1 against Louisville, loss. 1 against Clemson, loss. 0 against North Carolina, loss. 2 against Pitt, win. Right? So they're going to try to force turnovers. They're just not great at it. And honestly, some of the turnovers against Pitt were more about Pitt than they were, at least one of the interceptions was more about Pitt than it was about Virginia. And, even in that game, like Eli Holstein has just a seam route wide open, and he just throws it into the ground. And it's not a great offense, Trevor. It's not a great defense from an effectiveness standpoint. We talked about their red zone. Their red zone defense, I should say, is not very good. They rank 114th in college football in red zone defense. But here's the one thing that I'll say. Their defense is the polar opposite. Well, actually, it's the same exact as their offense, meaning red zone trips result in a lot of field goals. That's true for their offense, but it's also true for their defense, Trevor, because even though they rank 114th in red zone offense, they rank on the season, they rank 37th in red zone touchdown offense, which is, you don't often see a team rank in the bottom 20 in red zone overall and then rank in the top 40 in red zone touchdown rate. What it means is they're not forcing red zone turnovers. They're not making red zone stops, but they are doing a good job of holding teams to field goals. And so that is the one thing you look at and say, that's something to keep an eye on for Notre Dame. When you get in the red zone, can you turn them into touchdowns instead of field goals? And that's allowed them to keep staying some games at times, Trevor, is the ability to keep teams from getting in the end zone. So that's a big part of that defense. And then the other part too, Trevor, is they're very susceptible to big plays. They've given up 8 plays of 40 yards or more on the season, which isn't terrible, but they give up a lot of 30 plus. They rank 117th in college football in plays allowed of 30 yards or more. They rank 51st in plays of 40 yards or more. They rank 34th in plays of 50 yards or more. So they don't give up a lot of like the 60, 70-yard home runs, but they give up a lot of 20 pluses and a lot of 30 pluses. Now against Notre Dame and the athletes that Notre Dame has at running back and quarterback, 35-yarders against Virginia from other teams are going to be 60-yard touchdowns because of Notre Dame's talent. But they are a team that you can chunk to death. And that's what Notre Dame is going to have to do. So that's overall. They're a 4-2-5 team, Trevor. They're a hybrid 4-2-5. They have a position they call the spur. It's a lot like how Mike Elko had his 4-2-5 personnel at Wake back in the day, and even at Notre Dame, where their spur, which is technically their 5th DB, is 6'4", 221. He's a bigger, long, rangier kid, can do some linebacker stuff. They line up in a lot of over-under type stuff. They'll occasionally kind of pinch down in some bear looks, which I actually wouldn't be shocked if we see that a little bit against Notre Dame in Notre Dame's 12 personnel sets, to be honest with you. But they're a basic team with that. They don't do anything exotic. They'll bring some second-level pressures. They'll bring some third-level pressures. Jonas Sanker is going to come flying down a lot against the run. We'll talk about personnel a lot here in a little bit, Trev. But there's nothing exotic that you really look at and say, hey, like their offense is going to run reverse passes. They're going to run, flea flickers. They're going to do a lot of stuff to try to create big plays. Their defense is kind of like, hey, we're going to line up, we're going to play hard, and we're going to come at you and get after it. They try to mix up coverages at times, but honestly, they're just not good at it. That's why they blow a lot of coverages when they try to do all that disguising stuff, which is why I think partly why they kind of play basic a lot in this game. So schematically, nothing that Notre Dame hasn't seen before. Alignment-wise, nothing that Notre Dame hasn't seen before. And then personnel-wise, this is actually a game that worries me more than it should on paper. And here's why. They're very big up front. Their nose tackle's 311. Their starting D tackle, number 90, is 309. Their two ends are both 260 plus and physical. They're not great pass rushers, but like Cam Butler is physical. Chico Bennett is physical. And neither are explosive. Chico's had some success as a pass rusher in the past. He had 7 sacks 2 years ago. Hasn't had a whole lot since then. Their linebackers are big kids, 235, 240 plus pound kids. Cam Robinson I like him as their Mike. Number 7, James Jackson's a solid player, not as good as the other kid, but they have a very long rangy, second and third level. Cam Sanker or Jonas Sanker, 6'1", 6'2", close to 6'2". I mentioned the Spurs 6'4". They have a corner that's 6'2", another safety that's 6 foot. They play a lot of another. Caleb Hardy plays a lot at safety. He's 6'3". So they're pretty long, rangy defense. They're just not real fast. But I worry about their size and physicality giving Notre Dame's offensive line problems. That is probably one of the biggest matchup concerns to where maybe you don't play as well against them as you should because they're big and physical. That is the one concern I have about this game. If the offensive line plays well, this will be a blowout. If the offensive line gets pushed around and Notre Dame can't run the football, then this game may be a little bit closer for at least a while than it should be. And you even said it to me, Trev. I mean, their defensive line is not real talented athletically, but they compete. They're big and they compete.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same as their offensive line, right? I mean, we're talking about the comparisons between offense and defense. They just have a relentless motor, man. I mean, they're 2 defensive tackles. They carry a lot of weight. They're big kids, but they don't move really well. But I'm with you. It is their defensive ends. Their defensive ends are on the more athletic side of their defense, but they play really, really hard. So I'm going to be interested to see how Anthony Knapp holds up against guys that are like against the bull rush from a guy who's, their weak side defensive end has shown multiple times that he will just try to run you over, bull rush you back and kind of forklift you back into the quarterback, which has been an issue that Anthony Knapp has had this year. Yeah, linebackers, they have good size, which is going to be interesting to see how they play in the run. They're very much a downhill defense, but out in space that there's room for Notre Dame to expose them out in space, but you touched on him already. Jonas Sanker's a dude. That is a good football player, man. He is Virginia's starting safety and leads the team in tackles and tackles for a loss.
Yeah.
So leading your team in tackles for a loss as a safety is pretty impressive. So, and that's not just sacks, right? Like that's not they send him on a lot of, safety fire blitzes and he's getting after the quarterback as a free rusher. I mean, he's just blowing up plays in the backfield because he plays downhill really aggressively and he has good size. So, yeah, I am worried about how Notre Dame's offensive line is going to play because last week they didn't get that good of a push against Florida State's offensive or defensive line. Who's
also big.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now you said it to me, Trev, and you're spot on. I'll bring it up here. The thing is, the difference is they're at least athletic. Virginia's is not. But we've seen big defensive linemen give this offensive line problems at times in the season. We have. And that can't be ignored. You talked about Sanker real quick, though, Trev. He is a guy that is a second and first level defender. He's not – he'll do some coverage, but it'll most likely be at times against, out cuts and crossers and stuff like that. He'll take the tight end at times. He's not a guy that's going to be playing a lot of man coverage. He's not going to be playing the center field. He's got, I think, 2 interceptions in the last 3 years. He is a force. He is a downhill force. That is kind of what they do. He's a really good all-around player. I think he can do those other things. I actually do. I've watched some film of him, Trevor, and I think that he's a guy that can cover, especially tight ends, if you need him to. But he's not a guy that they ask to do that a whole lot. And he's been more vulnerable to getting beat in the pass game this year, in my opinion, than he was last year. He's given up a completions at a higher rate than he did last year, but he's a guy that you really need to have a plan for, trying to limit his ability to disrupt you. Like you said, what's he got, 6 or 7 tackles for loss on the season? Is it 6 or 7? 7? It's a safety with 7 tackles for loss in 9 games. I mean, he's on pace for almost double-digit tackles for loss. And a guy that makes a ton of tackles. And it's not just like, tackles where we talked, was it Miami of Ohio? Or who was it that we talked about earlier in the year? But we started talking about like Old Dominion, remember? It was the Miami of Ohio game. And I was making a point about how their linebacker makes a ton of plays, but he's not, and he has tons of tackles, but it's not like the Old Dominion team where like they had 2 guys that ranked among the national leaders in tackles, but like they both had like twice as many assisted tackles as they have solo tackles. And that's not really the case. That hasn't been the case the last 2 years of Sanker. He's got 69 tackles on the season, Trevor. 47 of them are solo tackles. The next closest guy has 30. So he's a really good in-space guy. And that's part of what I like about him in coverage is he'll give up completions, but he arrives right when the ball does. And you're not making a lot of plays after the catch on him. So for context, Notre Dame's leader in solo tackles this year's Jack Kaiser with 30. Now, part of that is Notre Dame's defensive players haven't played as many snaps as Virginia starting defensive players, because we talk a lot about Riley Leonard, but there's been a lot of games where Xavier Watts is not playing a whole lot in the fourth quarter or late in the third quarter either, especially the fourth quarter. So that factors into it a little bit. But the point is, that's still an impressive number. 47 solo stops for a safety that's not he's not an in-the-box safety. You know what I mean? He's not their rover, which is their spur. He's not that. He's a safety. Just says a lot about how good this kid is. And the other thing, too, that I wanted to point out, you made a comment about the 2 ends, Cam Butler and Chico Bennett. The other thing to keep in mind is they're both in that matchup against Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner, who are still young guys from Notre Dame. They're both 6th-year seniors that transferred into Virginia. So these are creeping up on to being close to their mid-20. I mean, they're 23, 24-year-old guys, at least 22, but probably 6-year players. I mean, if they're 6-year guys and they were 18 when they enrolled, that means they're 24. You know what I mean? Going against a kid in Anthony Knapp who's 18, 19 years old. There's just going to be times that grown man strength is going to get to him. You just need to make sure that as best you can, if you are having problems, you need to have a plan for how to help Anthony out a little bit with how you game plan, sliding your protections, things like that. But and they do a lot of really physical twists as well. Not a lot. They'll do some, and you have to be prepared for that as well. So I'll put it like this, Trevor. You should be able to score and score a lot, but you're going to have to earn it against Virginia. Physically earn it against Virginia. Because overall, we talked about Jonas Sanker, but outside of him, it's not a super talented football team. It really isn't. They have a couple guys I like. Like I said, I like Cam Robinson. I think Chico Bennett's a little bit more athletic than Cam Butler. Cam Butler's a little bit more powerful than Chico Bennett is. Like I said, the Cam Butler kid, you talk about a relentless motor. I mean, that guy he's number 82. That guy has a relentless motor. I mean, he plays hard, and you got to be prepared for that. And speaking specifically about Notre Dame, that's a concern because they're just not real big. I mean, both of their offensive tackles are 290 some pounds. So that's a matchup that I do get a little bit concerned with, Trevor. It's just the physicality and the experience and power that those kids bring to the table. Could they do some things to kind of stuff Notre Dame's run game a little bit and make life a little bit harder maybe than we think it should be coming into the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way that I can sum up Virginia as a whole is they're a team filled with a bunch of guys where you kind of look at the team and you say, I want that guy on my team. You know, like he's experienced. He's the senior. He's the 5th or 6th year guy. He might not be the most talented person in the room, but he's going to give you 110% of everything that he has. And Tony Elliott has a full roster full of those guys, you know, with a couple of, you know, special talents sprinkled in there, and, you know, Malachi Fields and Xavier Brown and Jonas Sanker. But yeah, those are kind of the teams that you kind of have to look out for. And I'm not here to paint this picture that if Notre Dame doesn't bring their A+ game, that Virginia is going to beat them. I do not believe that. I don't think anybody in the chat does. Brian, I know you don't believe that. But this is a team that it is going to have to be you do have to earn your keep a little bit physically. And it's almost kind of a polar opposite of the game that you had just played under the lights in your home stadium 2 days ago. You know, this isn't a team that's going to come in and, you know, get punched in the mouth and like, all right, well, here we go again. This is a team coming off of an upset win over a top 25 team in their house. You know, they're riding that level of confidence of like, yo, we can compete with some of these teams. You know, some of these players have to be sitting there thinking, yo, I just watched this Notre Dame team at home in a 3:30 kickoff game lose to Northern Illinois. I think we're better than Illinois. Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of things that Notre Dame's going to have to battle through early, and they're going to have to show up ready to play physically. And if they do, I think they're going to be fine.
Here's another aspect of this, Trevor, is this is another team late in the year that has a pass defense that struggles. Their cornerbacks especially, I think, are guys that you can absolutely go after. Can Notre Dame find ways to get after them? Can they find ways to attack Jonas Sanker with the pass game in a way that prevents him from being a force against the run? Can they find ways to go at and beat Jam Jackson, who looks a lot like the Thomas kid from Florida State, physically 6'2", long, not as good. Doesn't run as well, just not as good. He's a guy that teams have really been able to exploit on the season and take advantage of him. Can the pass game really take advantage? That's going to be a big thing. And can you protect the quarterback enough to do that? That's going to be a big key to this game. We'll dive more into that on Thursday. But that's something that I am very much looking forward to. And here's another ingredient. Because this is a physical defense and a physical offense, I think it would benefit Notre Dame. Not that they're not going to try, but like just not saying like this needs to be your plan, but we're just speaking results-wise. If they can really whoop this team and get a big lead and then get guys out in the second half, that'd be great ahead of the Army game next week. Your next 2 games are on the road. You're flying out to the East Coast the week before Thanksgiving. You're flying out to the West Coast the week after Thanksgiving. If you can have back-to-back games where your guys get limited snaps, in Florida State, even though, you know, Riley Mills played over 40 snaps, they weren't super physical snaps. I mean, they were dominant snaps. They weren't like, oh my gosh, that was a grind. I need to take an ice bath after this game. You know, there's some games, Trevor, where you play 30 snaps and you're like, dude, I just was in a battle. And there's games you're in 50 snaps and you're like, dude, I feel great because I just whooped those. I mean, you know what I mean? And that's how this Virginia game is. So it'd be really nice if they could kind of have, especially for the defense, if they could have this real dominant performance, just blow Virginia out so that you can get Riley off the field in the second, Riley Mills off the field in the third and fourth quarter. You know, you can get Xavier Watts out of there in late third quarter, early fourth, and take some of that pounding off because you're going to need every bit of that next week against Army with that option offense. And then, you know, my fear is back-to-back grueling games, physical games before you got to fly out to LA for Thanksgiving is my concern. So it's all about building to that USC game. If you can handle business, and a lot of this goes on the offense. If the offense can do what it needs to do, they're the ones that are going to determine if the defense can get off the field. You know what I mean? And so that's going to be a big key. Is I I do not feel great if they have to play back-to-back really physical games before USC, where Riley Mills is playing 40, 50 snaps, or 45 to 55 snaps. If Xavier Watts is playing 60 to 70 snaps, you know what I mean? Like, I don't love that. Getting ready to go play the triple option, we're going to have to defend a lot of snaps, and then you got to go out and play out in LA the next week. And, who's going to have a more mobile quarterback in the game now? Like that's my concern. And that's why I want to see this offense really come out and put this game away, Trevor, because I do not want to have these lines go 60 minutes against the hard-nosed blue-collar kids we talked about. Use your athleticism to put this game away so you don't have to be in that gritty trench warfare type of thing for 60 minutes. That's going to be a big part of this one.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really glad you brought that up because, Army is going to play you, like most of the service schools will, they're going to play you extremely physical, extremely tough because they are well aware of their athletic disadvantages when they play a team like Notre Dame. So the offense is going to be able to help out the defense just as much as the defense is going to be able to help out the defense in this game. So use the athleticism to your advantage, get your fast guys to the perimeter, put this game away early. I don't know necessarily if this is going to be a game where, Riley Leonard doesn't see a snap in the third quarter. I don't know if it's going to be that type of game, but it has the potential to be. Notre Dame absolutely has that capability.
Be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Be nice.
Yep.
I just like they're not like the Purdue game. They do in some ways remind me of Purdue, but they're just a lot better in that they're big and physical, but they're not overly fast. And that's how Purdue was, and this Notre Dame offense just rolled them. But they're better than Purdue defensively. They have more ability top to bottom, where Purdue's top guys were kind of, they were kind of like, they had a couple guys at the top, and then they weren't good at a lot of other places. This team, to me, is just, they're better. They're overall better than Purdue, which is why their numbers are better than Purdue. But they're built similarly, except that they're a 4-down team, which I think allows them to get an extra athlete on the field, where Purdue tried to be a 3-4 team, like a true 3-4 team. And that didn't work out real well against Notre Dame. They were just going to line up in their 3-4 defense, and Notre Dame was like, Virginia's going to have one less big guy on the field. That's what helps them a ton. But to your point, though, Trevor, is Notre Dame is a very athletic team. If this becomes a game about speed and skill, it could get to that point in time. I'm just concerned that Virginia may not try to do a bunch of body blows to try to extend this thing out. That's good. But you're spot on. If this becomes a track meet, Notre Dame will roll Virginia like North Carolina did. Because that's what North Carolina did. They out-athleted Virginia in that game. They just say, hey, we're faster. We're not as big and strong as you are. So let's not pretend that let's not try to be. We're going to out-athlete you. We're going to penetrate you up front on your offensive line. We're going to shoot gaps. We're going to bring pressures. We're going to make your big stiff offensive lineman move and handle twists and stunts, and you're not going to be able to. And offensively, we're going to get you in space. We're going to make your linebackers tackle our guys in space. We're going to make your DBs tackle our guys in space. That's who they are. And Virginia was able to punish them with that. Consider this. Notre Dame on the season has 73 missed tackles. A lot of that was early. Virginia has 95 missed tackles on the season. Notre Dame's leader in missed tackles is Adon Schuler at 7. The most missed tackles they have from a linebacker, 6. Cam Robinson has 14. Jonas Sanker has 8. You know what I mean? So, get them in space. Make them tackle your athletes in space. I would push the tempo in this game a little bit, to be honest with you. Get them on their heels. Don't let them line up and get their calls in and things like that. Make this a speed game, right? And if they do, then they roll them. And as somebody in the chat says, isn't that who Notre Dame is? Exactly. But they don't always play to that. There's been some times this year where Notre Dame's kind of, let's go slower and we're going to run. We saw that against Florida, not against Florida State, but we saw that against Navy. If Notre Dame plays with the same pace and urgency against Virginia that they played against Navy, they will steamroll this team, in my opinion. Steamroll them. I didn't see that same urgency and pace against Florida State. That's where I'm coming from, Trevor. Now, I think part of that was the rust, and it's harder to play with pace when you're throwing a lot of incompletions and you're getting a lot of short and, not positive runs. So that's where the execution kind of comes from. So that's my takeaway, Trevor. I do want to make sure they need to make sure this game is not a 4-quarter battle before they have to go play Army next week. You want to be fresh going into that game. And the way to do that, offense, give us some points. And then for Al Golden, it's like, okay, let's really try to create some turnovers, because that's where they can help the other side of the ball. Virginia is not a terrible turnover team, Trevor. I mean, they're not a team that's like in the top 10 in lost in turnovers lost. They're 54th in turnovers lost. So, but Notre Dame's a really good turnover team. And, Virginia, if you look at it in their 4 losses, the only game they didn't turn the ball over was against Louisville. They had 2 turnovers against North Carolina and 4 against Maryland. That's what did them in that game. And then they barely beat a Wake Forest team that's not very good. They had 2 turnovers. And so, Notre Dame has been a team that's forced 2 turnovers in all but two of their 9 games. That needs to continue this week. Forced turnovers in this game could get out of hand. Make it about speed, which I think then leads to turnovers, and that's how this game can get out of hand. So that's going to do it for the defensive breakdown, Trevor. We're going to talk a little bit about the college football playoff here next before we get out of here. But before we do, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as always, make sure that you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.